I spent my entire childhood desperately trying to win the affection of a secret, 22-year-old half-sister, who treated me like literal garbage, only to be manipulated into playing a happy family prop for her wedding photographs before she immediately threw me right back into the dumpster the second the cameras stopped flashing. Look, I just need to vent for a minute, so pull up a chair and let me tell you about the absolute parasite that is my older sister. I use the word sister very loosely here. I am a restorer of antique timepieces. I spend my days huddled over a magnifying glass in a dusty shop, fixing the broken guts of carriage clocks and pocket watches. I understand gears. I understand logic. I know that if a mainspring snaps, the hands stop moving. Cause and effect. It is a predictable universe. But my sister, Beatrice, does not operate on anything resembling human logic. Her entire existence is pure, unadulterated, predatory survival. Honestly, to try and make sense of her, I recently started reading this battered, water-damaged copy of The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. Have you ever read it? It is this 16th-century manual on how to be a ruthless, calculating ruler. Machiavelli talks about how it is safer to be feared than loved, and how a smart leader uses deception, manipulation, and strategic cruelty to maintain control over their territory. I swear on my life, Beatrice must have absorbed that book in the womb. She treats our family not as a group of human beings, but as a hostile kingdom to be conquered and stripped of its resources. I grew up in a place called Moraine Valley, a perpetually overcast, damp logging town surrounded by dense pine forests. My father ran a custom kiln, drying out specialized slabs of walnut and maple for rich furniture makers. He was a quiet, brooding man who smelled constantly of wet sawdust and engine oil. My biological mother died when I was 2 years old. I barely have a single memory of her. When I was 4 years old, my father married Sylvia. Sylvia was an absolute saint of a woman. She taught me how to bake bread from scratch, how to braid my hair, and how to just be a decent human being. She was my mother, in every way that actually mattered. So, I am 9 years old, right? Living my quiet, boring life in Moraine Valley. I come home from school one Tuesday in November, and there is this sleek, terrifying, adult woman sitting at our kitchen table. She had sharp features, cold eyes, and a posture so rigid she looked like she was ready to snap someone's neck. That was Beatrice. I had no idea she even existed until that very afternoon. It turns out, my father had a whole previous life before me. He was married in his early 20s to a woman named Margot, and they had Beatrice. They lived 3 states away, in this sprawling, concrete maze of a city. My father and Margot had a horrific, bridge-burning divorce, and Beatrice grew up completely alienated from him. She was 31 years old when she finally decided to show up at our house. That is a 22-year age gap between us. I was a child with missing front teeth, and she was a fully grown woman with a mortgage and a deep-seated, simmering rage. After that first bizarre meeting, a terrible new tradition started. Every other December, for the holidays, Beatrice, her mother Margot, and Margot's new husband would descend upon our tiny house like a plague of deeply unhappy locusts. And let me tell you, the energy in that house would turn instantly toxic. It was like breathing in carbon monoxide. Machiavelli writes that a prince must never show their true intentions, but Margot and Beatrice did not even bother to hide their disdain for me. Margot would sit on our sofa, refusing to take off her heavy wool coat, and just glare at me. If I walked into the room to watch television, she would look at me as if I were a cockroach that had just crawled out of the floorboards. She would purse her lips and let out this heavy, disgusted sigh. And Beatrice treated me like I was completely invisible. I was this lonely, eager little kid, just desperate for an older sister. I would bring her my school drawings. I would try to show her the snow forts I built in the yard. I would ask her questions about her life. I literally got one-word answers. Yes, no, move. She never made eye contact. She never smiled at me. She never, not once, asked me a single question about myself. I would sit there, staring at her, wondering what I had done wrong. I barely knew these people. How could they hate me so much? I used to run out to my father's kill shed, wrap myself in thick, dusty moving blankets, and just cry into the sawdust, trying to convince myself that I was just overthinking things. I would tell myself that they were just tired from the long drive, or that they were just private people. But deep down, my gut knew the truth. They despised me simply for breathing the same air as them. Then, everything suddenly flipped. I turned 18 years old and graduated from high school. Out of nowhere, Beatrice announces she is getting married to this guy named Arthur. Suddenly, I am invited to the wedding. But not just invited, she asked me to be a bridesmaid. I was absolutely shocked. I thought, oh my God, this is it. She is finally softening. She wants a relationship. I took a bus for 14 hours to get to her city. She bought me a ridiculous $400 dress. She smiled at me. She actually linked her arm through mine during the rehearsal dinner. We drank sparkling cider and took hundreds of photographs together. I felt this incredible warmth in my chest. I thought the Cold War was finally over. But I should have paid closer attention to Machiavelli. He explicitly warns that a prince will use strategic generosity and false flattery purely for optics, to secure alliances, and create a facade of benevolence. The absolute second the wedding reception ended, the mask slipped right back on. I went back to Moraine Valley, my heart full of hope, and I never heard from her again. I called her on the telephone for her birthday. Nothing. I sent long letters through the postal service. Completely ignored. I sent electronic messages. Silence. I realized with a sickening thud that I was never her sister. I was just a living, breathing prop for her wedding aesthetic. She needed a bridesmaid to balance out the bridal party photographs, and I was dumb enough to play the part. Fast forward a few years. I am 26 years old. I have my own little apartment above the town hardware store, but I spend almost all of my waking hours at my father's property because my clock repair workshop is attached to his massive lumber kill. The steady hum of the drying fans and the ticking of 100 antique clocks is my safe space. Then, my father and Sylvia sit me down at the dinner table. They look nervous. My father clears his throat and tells me that Beatrice, her husband Arthur, and their 5-year-old daughter Clara are packing up everything they own and moving to Moraine Valley. Honestly, my brain just short-circuited. I mean, it made absolutely zero logical sense. Arthur managed international logistics for a massive shipping corporation. They lived in this immaculate, modern condominium with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline. They drove 2 ridiculously expensive, imported luxury vehicles. Why on earth would they pack up and relocate to a perpetually damp, freezing logging town with no real economy? I asked my father what the reason was. He looked at his coffee mug and said, "They want to be closer to blood." I literally laughed out loud. It just slipped out. For almost 3 decades, this woman acted like my existence was an insult to her very core. She never called. She never visited. She ignored every attempt I made to connect. And now she wants to do Sunday dinners. Machiavelli argues that a smart prince will often feign weakness or affection to infiltrate a territory without raising the alarm of the local inhabitants. I knew, deep in my gut, that Beatrice did not suddenly discover a bleeding heart for family. But, like an absolute idiot, a tiny part of me thought, well, maybe people can change. Maybe I can finally have a relationship with her, and at the very least, I can be a good, fun aunt to my little niece, Clara. Boy, was I dead wrong. The moving trucks arrived a few months later, groaning up the steep, muddy driveway. And it was not just Beatrice, Arthur, and Clara. Oh, no. It was a full-scale tactical invasion. Margot and her new husband, Vance, moved too. But here is the part that still makes my eye twitch when I think about it. Margot and Vance immediately bought a sprawling, gorgeous brick house on the wealthy, manicured side of the valley. But Beatrice, Arthur, and Clara, they moved directly into the unfinished, drafty loft above my father's garage. I just remember standing in the driveway, watching them carry boxes up the wooden stairs, thinking, why? Just why? Why uproot your entire successful life, follow your mother across 3 state lines, but then refuse to actually live with her? Why cram your family into a dusty garage loft when you obviously have the money for your own place? Why now? For about 24 months, it was a bizarre, tense stalemate. We existed in parallel dimensions on the exact same piece of property. Despite us not forming any kind of sisterly bond, we were not actively fighting. I spent my days hunched over my magnifying glass, cleaning brass gears, and keeping my head down. I just accepted their weird presence and continued on with my life, assuming we had reached some sort of cold, silent truce. Then came the ambush. It was a Tuesday afternoon. It was pouring rain outside. I was sitting at my workbench, trying to delicately reconstruct the escapement wheel of an 18th century mantel clock. The door to my shop creaked open, and Beatrice walked in. Out of literal nowhere. She never came into my workspace. She hated the smell of the chemical solvents. She did not say hello. She just pulled up a wooden stool, sat down, and launched into this incredibly rehearsed, dramatic monologue. She looked me dead in the eyes and started telling me about how my biological mother, the woman who died when I was a toddler, allegedly treated her like absolute garbage when Beatrice was a young child. She spun this long, horrific story about all these incredibly cruel, petty things my mother supposedly did to her during those rare holiday visitations before my parents met. I am just sitting there, my fine-point tweezers frozen in midair. And as she is talking, this massive, heavy realization just drops on my chest. It all clicked together in my head. I thought, oh my God, she really has this deep, toxic resentment towards me because of this. She is looking at my face, and she is seeing a ghost she hates. Mind you, I was not even a fertilized egg when my mother was allegedly doing these terrible things to her. I did not even exist. But she was not done. She seamlessly pivoted and started tearing into my father. She told me that when my father was married to Margot, he was an emotionally abusive, volatile tyrant. She said it was a dark, unhappy time in her life, and then she leaned in and said, "You are just so incredibly lucky that he watered himself down for you and Sylvia." I mean, I was completely paralyzed. My brain is screaming, so her and Margot have really been holding a grudge all this time, 4 decades, and they have been taking it out on me, like I am somehow at fault for events that happened before my birth. I did not defend myself. I did not yell. I just sat there, clutching my tweezers, and I stuttered out, "I am so sorry you had to go through all of that." I told her I barely knew my mother because she passed away so young, so I had no idea she was capable of those things. I just let her vent her poison. Machiavelli says that men are so simple, and so subject to present necessities, that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. She wanted me to feel guilty for a past I had no part in. And then, just as abruptly as she had walked in, she stood up, smoothed her expensive wool sweater, and walked right back out into the rain. It was so random. It was so weird. I just sat alone in the ticking silence of my shop, completely bewildered that my own flesh and blood had despised me my entire life over things totally out of my control. A few days after that bizarre, unprompted ambush in my workshop, I was out in the main lumber yard helping my father load some heavy planks of kiln-dried walnut onto a flatbed delivery truck. The air smelled sharply of damp earth and tree sap. I just could not get her words out of my head. They were buzzing around my brain like angry hornets. So, while we were strapping down the lumber, I just casually brought it up. I told him every single thing Beatrice had said to me. The abuse, the cruelty, all of it. My father stopped pulling on the canvas tie-down strap. He just stood there, wiping his calloused hands on his denim trousers, looking at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a dead language. He shook his head and told me, "I have absolutely no earthly idea what you are talking about." He swore to me, up and down, that none of it was true. He said he was never, not once, abusive towards Margot or Beatrice. He also said that my biological mother was nothing but kind to Beatrice during those extremely rare visits. In fact, that conversation right there in the lumber yard was the very first time he was hearing any of these accusations. I just leaned against the side of the truck, completely baffled. I mean, my brain was just spinning. Machiavelli explicitly writes that a successful prince must be a great liar and hypocrite, and that men are so simple that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. But this felt completely pointless. Why would she randomly come into my sanctuary and spin this elaborate, traumatic fictional tale about her life? It is not like she was using the story as an olive branch, or an excuse for why we were not close, or trying to apologize for ignoring me my entire childhood. There was absolutely no strategic reason for her to make any of it up. I was a fully grown adult at that point. I had stopped caring if she and I had a relationship long before she moved into that garage loft. Like, what was the actual point of the lie? It bothered me so much that a few weeks later, I finally decided to corner her. I saw her walking across the muddy gravel driveway toward the main house, carrying a bag of expensive, imported groceries. I marched right up to her and asked her, point blank, why they really left their luxury condominium and moved to Moraine Valley. She did not even break her stride. She just adjusted her grip on her paper bag and rattled off this obviously rehearsed list of reasons. She told me that Arthur and his family were not very close-knit, and she wanted to be surrounded by family. Then she said that our grandmother, my father's mother Eleanor, was getting older and probably was not going to be alive for much longer, so she wanted to spend her last few years with her. And then, the absolute kicker, she looked me dead in the eye and said they moved because Clara had better university options here in our state. I just stood there in the mud, staring at the back of her designer raincoat as she walked away. I did not even bother calling her out on it, but I knew every single word was garbage. First of all, she had never cared about being close to family in her entire 30-something years of existence. Second, Clara was 5 years old, and even if we were planning for the future, Moraine Valley had a single, crumbling community college annex located directly behind a tractor dealership. Better university options. It was an absolute, laughable lie. But my brain just would not stop turning. My spidey senses were tingling on maximum overdrive. I still could not understand her real motive, but I knew she was hiding a massive, calculating agenda. And then, about 9 years ago, the absolute worst thing imaginable happened. My stepmother, Sylvia, died. It was incredibly sudden. A massive, catastrophic aneurysm right in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. 1 minute she was baking sourdough bread in the kitchen, and the next minute, the paramedics were loading her into an ambulance. She was gone before they even reached the county hospital. This woman raised me. She was not my birth mother, but she was my mom in every single way that mattered. When she died, my entire world shattered into a million sharp little pieces. I was in a state of complete, suffocating shock. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I could barely remember how to breathe. But Beatrice saw my vulnerability as an opportunity. Machiavelli teaches that a prince must strike their enemies when they are disorganized and weak. The very next morning after Sylvia passed away, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cold cup of tea, just completely hollowed out. Beatrice marched into the kitchen, got right up in my face, and started screaming at me. "You need to hold it together," she yelled, her face red with this unhinged anger. "Stop crying. Stop trying to take all the attention away from your father. This is not about you." I was completely paralyzed. I was in incomplete and utter shock from the trauma of losing the only mother I had ever known. I was in a terrible headspace, but I knew for a fact that I was doing absolutely everything I could to not be a burden. I was quiet. I was making telephone calls to the funeral home. I did not want anyone's attention. I just wanted my mom back. But Beatrice and her mother, Margot, made the entire week leading up to the funeral a living, breathing hell. They treated me worse than an enemy combatant. They treated me like absolute trash. They would roll their eyes if I started crying. They would aggressively whisper about me whenever I walked into the room. She literally acted like I had no right to be upset, as if I did not love Sylvia at all. Sylvia was my angel. I loved her with every single fiber of my being. Honestly, here I was, dealing with the catastrophic loss of 2 mothers before I had even reached 30 years old. Dealing with the death of a mother is a very specific, suffocating type of hurt that I would not wish on my absolute worst enemy. But having to go through it twice in one lifetime, it breaks something fundamental inside of you. It hurts. It still hurts, every single day. And I still have genuine psychological trauma from how Beatrice treated me during that week. Because of her constant, vicious attacks, it took me 5 full years to actually process my grief. I was so incredibly lost, and I just could not comprehend how anyone could be so deeply cruel to someone who was already bleeding out. Machiavelli explicitly advises in his writings that when you conquer a new territory, you must completely extinguish the bloodline of the previous ruler so they cannot rise up, rally the people, and reclaim their position. I did not realize it at the time, because I was drowning in grief, but I was the previous bloodline. I was the last remaining threat to her complete and utter control over my father and his sprawling property. So, she plotted in the shadows, and she executed a flawless, devastating coup. Less than a month after we buried Sylvia, when I was at my absolute lowest point, barely eating and operating like a hollowed-out ghost of a human being, Beatrice got to him. I do not know exactly what she whispered in his ear when I was not around. She probably told him that I was wallowing too much, that my grief was dragging him down into depression, and that I needed some severe tough love to force me to grow up and face the real world. Whatever toxic narrative she spun, it worked flawlessly. My own father, the man whose lumber kill I had helped maintain since I was a child, walked into my clock repair shop, stared at his heavy leather boots, and told me I had to leave his property. He kicked me out. I had to pack my fragile glass domes, my delicate brass gears, my tiny screwdrivers, and all my clothes into discarded cardboard boxes, while my sister watched from the window of her rent-free garage apartment. The ticking of my clocks felt like a countdown to my own exile. The betrayal was so absolute, so suffocating, that it caused severe emotional damage in my life that I am still actively trying to repair in therapy today. I just felt so totally abandoned, discarded like a broken mainspring. I will never, for the life of me, understand how anyone could do that to someone they are supposed to care about, let alone their own family, when they are clearly bleeding out on the floor. But I had to survive. I loaded my boxes into my rusty sedan and moved 3 states away to a baking, dry desert town where the humidity could not rust my tools. I found a job repairing vintage pocket watches in the back room of a pawn shop, and I forced myself to come to terms with my new reality. I stay far, far away from Moraine Valley. Over the last decade, my father and I have reconciled a tiny, microscopic bit. We speak on the telephone on holidays, but it is superficial. It is guarded. It is nothing like the relationship I wish we had, but I can no longer live in the same state as that woman. But here is the thing that makes the blood actually boil in my veins. It has been over 10 years since that horrible day. More than a decade. And Beatrice, Arthur, and my niece Clara are still living in that freezing, unfinished loft above my father's garage. They never even attempted to get their own place. My father does not charge them a single red cent in rent. And I know for an absolute, documented fact that they have 2 full-time, highly lucrative salaries. On top of that, they own 2 separate, beautifully renovated rental houses across town that generate massive passive income for them every single month. But they actively choose to live in a cramped, mini apartment underneath my father's roof. I mean, sure, I get it. The economy is terrible, life is incredibly expensive right now, and they are undoubtedly hoarding cash to pay for Clara to go to an expensive university. But here is my massive, glaring issue with this entire absurd arrangement. My father is getting older. His health is failing rapidly. His mobility is declining at a terrifying speed. His knees are essentially just bone grinding on bone, and he cannot operate the heavy machinery in his lumber yard anymore. He can barely walk down the steep gravel driveway to check the postal box. And those 3 able-bodied adults, who have been living on his land completely rent-free for more than 10 years, absolutely refuse to help him with anything. They will not help him scrub the floors or clean the house. They will not cook a single warm meal for him. They will not mow the overgrown lawn, or rake the wet pine needles, or do a single chore to maintain the property they occupy. When he asks for a hand moving a heavy piece of furniture, or fixing a leaky water pipe under the kitchen sink, he just gets completely ignored or aggressively brushed off. They tell him they are simply too busy with their careers. So, ultimately, my dad has to use his telephone to call my older brother, Elias, who has a terrible, fused spine himself. Elias has to drive all the way across the valley just to help our father with basic household survival tasks. I sit in my desert apartment, and I literally cannot believe the sheer audacity of my sister and her husband. How profoundly selfish and incredibly lazy can a human being be? And even though I constantly tell myself that I should not care anymore, I do. He is still my dad. I am thousands of miles away, and I physically cannot be there to help him. Honestly, it eats me alive with guilt, because before I was so ruthlessly banished, I was the one who did all the cooking. I did all the cleaning. I kept that entire property running smoothly. Part of me knows I should not feel guilty, because I did not choose to leave, but the guilt sits heavy in my stomach anyway. Regardless of our fractured history, and what he let her do to me, how can Beatrice just live 20 feet away from him, and not lift a single finger, when he specifically asks for help? He is old, he is struggling to survive, and she genuinely does not care at all. It is mind-blowing how thoughtless a person can be toward their own father. And in the middle of finding all of this out from Elias on the telephone last week, the final, glaring light bulb just clicked on in my brain. It illuminated everything, every single weird, unexplainable thing she had done since I was 9 years old suddenly made terrifying sense. She never actually cared about being closer to her family. She never cared about what community college Clara was going to attend. It was never about mending fences or building a community. It was always a siege. It was a slow, methodical occupation of the territory, just like Machiavelli outlines. She wants to inherit the entire logging property. I would bet my life savings on it. Her entire reason for abandoning her Skyline condominium and moving her family into a freezing garage apartment was a calculated, decade-long play to take everything when he finally passes away. She wanted to physically occupy the land, weave herself so deeply into his daily existence that she could completely isolate him, and make absolutely sure that I end up with nothing. She wanted to rewrite history, eliminate the competition, and seize the kingdom. But honestly, the joke's on her, because my father has a legally binding will. I do not truly know if I will actually get a single thing from that estate, and to be completely blunt with you, I do not even care anymore. A wooden house and a few acres of damp pine trees are not worth the psychological warfare. But I do know for a fact that his legal documentation states the entire property must be completely liquidated upon his death, and the profit must be split evenly between his children. She cannot just lock the doors and claim it as her prize. All those years of living in a cramped garage loft, all those years of listening to the deafening hum of the lumber kill, and she still has to split the spoils with the sister she tried to erase. Honestly, she probably planned this entire operation 30 years ago. The slow, methodical isolation of our father, the strategic manipulation, the sudden move across state lines, it was a textbook political campaign. And the saddest part of this whole messy story is that she already won in the only way that actually mattered. All I ever truly wanted in my entire life was a family that loved and cared about me. I wanted an older sister I could text when my life was falling apart, someone to gossip with, someone to share holiday recipes with. I wanted a father who would protect me, who wouldn't throw me out into the cold at the absolute lowest point of my life, just because a calculating parasite whispered poison in his ear. I don't have that. I never will now. She successfully fractured my relationship with my father, she took my home, and she effectively stole the young adult life I was supposed to have. I will never understand the sheer, bottomless malice it takes to do that to your own flesh and blood, but I am doing the best I can to come to terms with it out here in the desert. My clocks keep ticking, the gears keep turning, and I am slowly rebuilding my own life, far away from her toxic kingdom. Sorry for this being so incredibly long. I do not really have a grand reason for making this post tonight, except that the thoughts were suffocating me and I just needed to get them out of my head.